Welcome back to the Barrels Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode of Let's Talk About It. And today we are doing something a little bit different. The NBA season is 2 weeks away. I wanted to give a chance to think of 10 NBA guys that I think could be traded this upcoming season just throughout the year. But before we get into that, make sure to leave a like on the video. It helps the channel out a ton. And subscribe to the channel for future NBA and NFL content. Going to be overlapping. Both seasons are going to be going at the same time. We're going to have a ton of content out about both on a weekly basis. But without further ado, we can get into the top 10 players or just 10 guys that I think will get moved at some point throughout this next NBA season. I do have some honorable mentions. It's kind of hard to kind of round this down to 10. Guys like Colin Sexton, I think, could be somebody that could get moved. Same with Jordan Clarkson. They're on the same team in Utah. I think Bruce Brown is always somebody who's been a name that's been linked in trade rumors ever since moving on from Denver, going to the Pacers, and now Toronto. Same with Jakob Poeltl. I feel like he's always in some low-key trade rumors as well around the deadline. And two other names I have are guys like Kyle Kuzma, who was kind of an interesting one. I thought that he would be a no-brainer to get moved, but now with Deni Avdija now being on the Wizards now, I feel like there is still a place for him in Washington in terms of them developing that young core. And then I do have Jeremy Grant as well, who is somebody who I feel like now they're kind of pivoting towards possibly being able to move that bigger contract with a now year off of that. I think the team could be desperate enough to move off of and go accept something like a Jeremy Grant onto their team, but that contract is still very large, so I kind of just wanted to leave him in my honorable mentions. Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson are still two weird ones. I feel like Jordan Clarkson could have been moved by now, but these are all names where I like if they stayed the full year, I'm not surprised, but if they do get moved, I'm not shocked either. That's why I kind of kept all these guys in my honorable mentions. But going into my top 10, I kind of base this off of kind of what I'm feeling going into the year, kind of what I'm seeing situations possibly turning out and being for these certain guys, and some guys are just going to be the odd man out. That's going to be a common theme when it comes to some of these trades throughout the year. I have some guys that are on the younger side, some on the older side, some guys that you know the names of that I do want to break down and talk about a little bit more. And I do have at my number one spot somebody I feel like is not really talked about. Somebody that is, I feel like, commonly in trade rumors throughout the past couple of seasons. Somebody that I'm not really seeing a lot of steam be picked up on, but I'm going to break down that situation, how it could play out to him getting moved. But at number 10, somebody I have talked about in the Pacers deep dive video, Bennedict Mathurin. I think he is that guy that teams would be very attracted towards if the Pacers were to move him and make him available, because I do think for this Pacers team, and from a situational aspect, is still one move away. I think even with the conference finals run last year, I think in terms of the upper echelon of teams in the Eastern Conference, I think they're just a step below that. And I think they're in the same conversation as teams like Orlando, Cleveland, Miami. If you want to even throw like a sleeper team like Atlanta in there, if they got it together, I think they're all kind of in that same mix. And I do think they're still one move away. I think they're one player away, and they're a very deep young team as well, to where when I'm looking at them, I think, what is that next step? Because cap room wise and draft pick wise, you already gave up draft capital to go get Pascal Siakam, and you already have a lot of cap space on the roster in general. But with Bennedict Mathurin, you have a lot of young talent that can take in place of those draft capital positions. And I think Bennedict Mathurin could be a name that could be used. You brought back Obi Toppin, who could be used. His contract could be used in a different type of trade. Or if you want to keep Obi Toppin, you can move a Jarris Walker, which is their lottery selection a couple years ago now, that he hasn't really touched the court at all, but mainly focused on Bennedict Mathurin being the main attraction piece in the package because of his ability to score the ball. You got to think he didn't play in that entire run to the Eastern Conference Finals and really in the back half of last year because he was hurt. So now you're kind of more confident where like we can go upgrade a position on our team of need to really bolster up our chances of really competing with the top end of the Eastern Conference. And I think them upgrading that small forward position, having them Nesmith come off the bench could be better suited for them if they want to go really upgrade and bolster up a position of need. And I think Bennedict Mathurin could be on the move because it seems like he's a little bit of the odd man out when you have Nembhard taking his rise. I think Ben Shepherd was great in the playoffs for them last year as well. You see Nesmith and what he brings defensively. You still have Pascal Siakam, Tyrese Halliburton, TJ McConnell. So they have a lot going on there in Indiana to where I think they would want to maybe look to slim down that rotation just a little bit. It's always good to have depth, but I feel like in terms of young talent, it's kind of better to maybe flip those pieces when you're already a team that is looking to contend to go to the NBA Finals. So I think looking at that, Bennedict Mathurin could be out the door this upcoming season at some point at the trade deadline. It just depends on how big that market is and if he can get his value high enough to get them something that they would even want in general. And number 9 is another situation where it's just another odd man out. Somebody who I think is going to get moved. I think he's going to have a very big bounce back year off the injuries. I have Lonzo Ball here at 9. Looking at that, he has $21 million worth on that contract. And if he is even 80% of what he was pre-injury, even 70, I think he's worth every penny of that contract for just what he's giving you. You got to think maybe the defense will take a step back due to the athleticism. But still a phenomenal playmaker, high IQ guy. You're going to even want the shots to be more and more consistent, which it already was pre-injury. So you're looking at 6'5", 6'6" guard, high IQ, great facilitator and playmaker, and somebody that can really be a nice 3-and-D piece for your team. I think that is still super, super valuable, but the injuries have made it to the Chicago Bulls to where he doesn't really fit what they do anymore. You brought in Josh Giddey, you have Kobe White, you have Ayo Dosunmu, and you're looking at Lonzo Ball in the last year of his deal. Even if he does play really well this year, I don't know if they're going to be really in the mix to bring him back because you still have Josh Giddey on a long-term deal. You have Ayo Dosunmu, like I said, and Kobe White. So that guard and backcourt room is already a lot really, really cluttered to where like you're probably better off trying to move Lonzo Ball if he can get his value up high enough to get something that you would even want. But I do think the market would be high on him. And we're going to pair him up talking about another guy that's also on this team in a possible trade coming up. But I think he will gain a lot of interest from a contending team if they were to make his name available at the deadline for what he can give you at that guard position. And you're not asking Lonzo Ball to come in there and be the savior of the franchise. You're asking him to be a great complementary role player, which is something I think that he's going to be able to thrive at, which is what he was already thriving at pre-injury. And I think he can give you a lot of the same things that he was giving you before the injury, especially if he can get that shooting down even more consistent than what it already was. I think Lonzo Ball could be a very enticing name in trade rumors this year because of the situation. They already have what they kind of are looking to have in Chicago. Last year of his deal, $21 million. Teams can make that work. And I think he's somebody that can just add a little bit more and help get a team in a better position going forward in the future for a possible playoff contention. So at number 8, I have another odd man out situation, Anthony Simons. I'm surprised this one didn't happen this offseason. But Shannon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson are going into the season banged up. I know Shannon Sharpe is dealing with a shoulder thing, and Scoot Henderson is also banged up going into the year. But I'm really surprised that Anthony Simons has not been moved yet. I don't really know, obviously, just from me being a fan of the game. I don't know how his value is because I feel like he has the empty stats narrative being pushed through a lot there in Portland with over the past couple of seasons. But I do think with his scoring punch and his ability, and he's still younger, he has 2 years, $25 million left on that contract, I think he could get some interest on the market because Portland, they have a lot going on there in the backcourt and the front court with what they have with Jeremy Grant, who is a name on my honorable mentions. You have Scoot, Shannon Sharpe, which you got to prioritize their development. You brought in Deni Avdija now, and I think he's steal for them in terms of their timeline. You have Ayton, you have Donovan Clingan behind him, and you also have Robert Williams, who they're still trying to look to move. So, like, you have a lot going on, like, and guys like Matisse Thybulle are still on the team as well. There's a lot going on that team. I think Anthony Simons is somebody you might need to package. Maybe him and a Matisse Thybulle, go ship them off to a team that needs some scoring and some defense, a little bit of both worlds. That's the kind of thought process I'm seeing from an Anthony Simons because his value is so weird to where he's paid, but he's young, but then he has this empty stats narrative, which I don't really believe in. So it's very weird. He might need to get packaged with something around the league to really get that value going. Maybe it's a Robert Williams, Matisse Thybulle. Maybe that trade entices the team to get both offense and defense in the trade. So it's going to be very interesting because if the Portland Trailblazers think about big picture, think if they're fully healthy all year, where does Simons fit in that rotation? And then it's like, do you want to move Shannon Sharpe to the 3, but then you brought in Deni Avdija, you can't put Jeremy Grant, he's getting paid too much, so you can't put him off the bench. Then you have Deni Avdija you just traded for, who's damn near your best player, so you can't bring him off the bench either. So it's just, and then you're looking at Anthony Simons and it's like, he probably doesn't want to come off the bench either for Shannon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson, because at this point in time, I could say that Anthony Simons is probably better than both of those guys, but you want to prioritize development. So it's a complex thing. that's going on over there in Portland, to where I think Anthony Simons could be the odd man out, and I think is the odd man out, and I think him getting packaged with something else that's already on the team could be an avenue to him getting moved off of Portland this year. At 7, interesting player for sure, interesting situation from the past 2 seasons. I have Jaden Ivey. Now, this is me completely based off last year, where they had head coach Monty Williams, and it came to the point where Killian Hayes was starting over Jaden Ivey, which I thought was insane. But I just feel like he hasn't really been unlocked and tapped into that full potential over there in Detroit, and a lot of people haven't. But looking at this from based off of last year, there's just something. Let me know in the comments, because there's just something with him and the Pistons to where I'm like, there's something missing. There's something just off there. I think they might not like the fit as much as they thought with the Cade and the Jaden Ivey. They tried to go Killian Hayes and Cade last year with the Monty Williams. Now he's no longer with the team. Killian Hayes is gone as well. And then it's like, now they're kind of going into hitting that corner, and they're trying to just win games and trying to be a little bit more competitive, bringing in Tim Hardaway, Tobias Harris. Then you have Cade, Jaden Duren, Isaiah Stewart, Marcus Sasser, Fontecchio. So like, you have a lot going on with the roster, but I just feel like his fit has never really been prioritized, and his development has never really been prioritized, really. And then the year that he did play a lot, Cade Cunningham wasn't healthy. So looking at this, I just think there is an avenue for them to move off of him. A young guard that has a lot of potential. I just feel like he needs to get into the right situation with the right level of coaching. I don't know if Bickerstaff is that guy, and I didn't think, obviously, Monty Williams was that guy for him. So I think they're just looking at this from a management standpoint, looking at the fit between him and Cade, and they don't really like it as much as they thought they would. And I think this could be a situation to where he's a surprising name that gets moved at the deadline because he's still young, he's still on a cheaper contract, to where they can go get a better fitting piece that's going to help them be more competitive right now, because Cade Cunningham is their guy. So it's going to be very interesting to see. He's definitely a name where I haven't seen a lot of attention around, but I think the fit and situation that has gone on with him and the Pistons could lead to him being moved at the deadline this year. At 6, I have Cam Johnson, somebody who I feel like it's just a matter of time. I think it's just a matter of time with a player like Cam Johnson. He's older. He doesn't fit what the Nets want to do timeline-wise. His contract is a little hefty. $23 million, still has a couple more years left on his contract. He is something that is going to have to be paired up with, I feel like, unless you do get a team like a Lakers that want to add more shooting, that wants to do like a 1-for-1 swap. But I think Cam Johnson and like a Dennis Schroeder could be an enticing package for a contending team. But you got to also take into account the new second apron rules. So he's going to be a little bit harder of a name to move, because you got to think he was making more money than Mikal Bridges. And it's very interesting to see how how the Nets kind of do this whole fire sale thing, which I think they're going to do this season, in terms of a Dennis Schroeder, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, even if Ben Simmons turns it around. Like, there's a bunch of stuff going on, and the Nets have finally found their direction that they're going in. Cam Johnson, I think, is going to be the top name that gets moved off this team this upcoming season throughout some point in the year. Shooting is at a premium in this league, and somebody that can play the 3 or the 4 for a team, I think he's going to have a market no matter how many M's are on the contract. And I think $23 million is something that the Nets could do, take on some other bad contracts with some draft capital to send off Cam Johnson to another team that's going to want to use Cam Johnson to help them make a playoff push. But for the Nets side of things, for this trade to happen, I do think it's going to have to be them taking on a bad contract and getting draft compensation, which is something that they could use. Take on the bad contract, whatever, wash your hands with it. So I think Cam Johnson does get moved at some point this season. At 5, I do have Jalen Green. Big name and big rumors this past offseason. The Houston Rockets are actively looking for a star player. That happened this offseason with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. And I've seen some links to Jimmy Butler as well. I don't see them starting to stop. He's one of those players who hasn't been paid yet, and I think there's a reason behind that, because I don't know if they're really sold on him. They just went and drafted Reed Shepherd. You still have the Thompson brother. You still have Fred VanVleet. They have a lot going on in this roster, and it's working. But his up and down play has kind of made Houston hesitate to kind of give him that extension and to really pay him going forward. So I think he is definitely a big name that's going to be the big name target and a big trade for a star that I do think they are looking for at this year's deadline, because I do think they're at a weird time right now to where they're coached really well, but they're so deep and they have a ton of young talent. They're kind of like in the Pacers in a way, but they're still one key star piece away from really propelling them into like really competing for a playoff spot still. Maybe that is Jalen Green's development, but I feel like it's kind of to the point where they want to go get that star guy. And I feel like that is the avenue where Jalen Green gets off the Rockets. And I think Jalen Green, with the addition of what they've already done in Reed Sheppard, you kind of want to have Reed Sheppard more. So I feel like it's just been a mix of Jalen Green being very inconsistent. And I think it could lead to Jalen Green being moved this season in some kind of blockbuster star kind of trade. But that's kind of my mindset on Jalen Green, because I think he has a world of potential still. But I do think it's just kind of the end of the road for him as a Houston Rocket at this point in time. Especially with how active the Rockets have been in a lot of different trade talks, I think it's going to happen at this year's deadline. At 4, get into bigger names in this top 4. I have Brandon Ingram. I think the writing is on the wall. You have somebody in Trey Murphy, who I feel like is just gearing up to really being that starting small forward or power forward for this team. And the development is there for Trey Murphy. I think Trey Murphy has a lot of potential to still grow into. And I think with the Pelicans, you bring in DeJounte, Zion, you need to go get a big man. I think if they want to go get a high caliber big, it's going to have to come at the expense of Brandon Ingram. I am shocked that he is not an Atlanta Hawk right now with them getting DeJounte Murray. I really am. I thought the trade package was always DeJounte and Clint for Brandon Ingram and whatever else you wanted to throw in there. But he stayed on the Pelicans. And I do think he's going to be on the Pelicans until the deadline, but there's going to be a team that is desperate, that has some injuries, or is making a playoff push, or is trying to make it to the finals push, that is going to look at Brandon Ingram. I'm surprised the Warriors haven't been more involved in a Brandon Ingram. I know you're going to have to pay him, but in the NBA, you have to pay to win. Looking at the Boston Celtics, they have their 5 guys all paid for multiple years. I think you can't take this cheap route in the NBA anymore. I think Brandon Ingram is still a fine NBA player. The only thing that hesitates teams is kind of the injury history with him, and they're going to have to pay them if they trade for him. So that's already 2 things that are going to be in the back of teams' minds when it comes to trading for a Brandon Ingram level player. But I do think he gets moved because I do think the Pelicans are going to realize they need to address the big man position. I do know that they're going into the direction where they're going to run Zion at the small ball 5, which I'm not mad at, but I think it can only get you so far. Yves Missy's still a rookie. You have Daniel Tice, which is the other center on the roster, but I think Brandon Ingram is going to be that avenue for them to really address that 5 spot, and I think that is where the trade happens at the deadline. At 3, another interesting situation to where it all depends on how this team does this year. This is the team in the Denver Nuggets who have lost 2 key rotational pieces of the past 2 years in Bruce Brown and KCP. They're flirting with that second apron. They don't really have a lot of different avenues to really get better and bolster up this roster. You bring in Russell Westbrook, which I think is going to be a phenomenal addition that's going to unlock Jamal Murray being able to be more of a 2. I think you always have the Jamal Murray-Jokic pick and roll, but I think Westbrook is giving them the ability of just a spark. I feel like this Denver team was missing a spark without Bruce Brown. Westbrook brings that. He allows Jamal Murray to play more off the ball, and I think that's going to help Jamal Murray get a rhythm going more so throughout the year. And I think the avenue and the person that could be traded is MPJ. I think if this team got to the deadline and they were kind of plateauing, and I think they were kind of realizing we're just not good enough at this current time, even with a Jokic and Jamal Murray, the top end of the West is really talented. I think they could look to add something more than MPJ, somebody that can give them more than what MPJ can give them, rather than I feel like MPJ hasn't really hit that next step in his game of being more of a shot creator and a better defender. But he's catch and shoot, and he's a great rebounder, but he's still super young on a long-term deal. He has been extended to where I think the Denver Nuggets could look outward and to think MPJ is our avenue to get really a lot better. Because that money-wise, they don't really have those avenues to get better through that way, so they would have to be through a trade. And I think MPJ, not saying it's going to happen, this trade is very situational based. And if the Denver Nuggets were struggling at the deadline, I could see a world where they make MPJ available to maybe help the roster out as a whole. because there's still a lot of question marks on that depth piece on the bench, a lot of young guys that need to prove it. So looking at that, I think MPJ, if the Denver Nuggets are struggling at the deadline, I think MPJ could be a name that you see start to spark around in rumors to be traded. And then my top two, number two, I have Zach LaVine. Obviously going to wrap back around to the Lonzo Ball situation. I think in terms of Zach LaVine, I think teams are sleeping on him. I think people are being crazy in terms of his value. Zach LaVine is one of the most skilled players in the game from a scoring perspective. He needs to get that value up. He needs to have a season where he stays healthy. And I think to get a deal done, I think you need to pair two of these guys up on the list to try to get something done. Lonzo Ball and what he can give you if him and Zach LaVine bring that value back. Those two guys are, like I said, kind of same situation with Zach LaVine. The Bulls are going into a different direction to where Zach LaVine doesn't really fit that anymore. And with the play of Kobe White last year with Zach LaVine out for most of the year, now you're really seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for Zach LaVine to be traded. Now, talking about the trade, because it's the contract. He's making a lot of money for somebody who, kind of like in Brandon Ingram's case, is kind of injury prone at times, but I think if he has a healthy bounce back year, he's one of the most skilled scorers in all of basketball. You pair him up with Alonzo Ball, if he bounces back, if you get what I'm saying, you compare those two contracts up, possibly get a deal done to get them out of there, like how it was for Alex Caruso and Zach LaVine, how they were trying to pair those two up to get Zach LaVine traded. It can kind of be that same situation for Alonzo Ball, who's making more than a Caruso, but I'm sure at the deadline the team will be desperate enough to try to get a deal done that way. And I just think it's at the end of the tunnel for Alonzo Ball and Zach LaVine, as their careers have kind of gotten into a weird space where I think they both need a change of scenery and they both just need to stay healthy. Now at number one, I have somebody who was recently signed, can't be traded till December 15th, but I do have James Harden. Let me paint the picture for you guys. He can't be traded till December, and this Clippers team and everything that they have going for them this season is all based off of the health of Kawhi Leonard, right? If Kawhi Leonard, like it's already being reported, is having inflammation in his knee, if Kawhi Leonard is not healthy for at least 80% of this team's games, I think this team is going to be in the bottom half of the Western Conference, and I think it's going to get to a point where James Harden once again gets his name back in trade rumors post this recently signed rule at December 15th. But if this all comes down to the situation, a lot of these trades are a lot situational based, but we're going into it before the season, how I think things could play out. Imagine a world where the Clippers are bad at the deadline. They have no reason to hang on to a James Harden that has another year who just re-ups with the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard can't stay healthy. The Clippers are on the bottom half of the play-in. I could see a world where a team is desperate enough to go trade for James Harden. I really do. I think this could be a world where James Harden can also get his value back up in terms of a scoring aspect. Playmaking-wise, we know what we're getting from James Harden. James Harden can give you 18 and 12 on any given night. But he's going to be the one if Kawhi Leonard isn't there. He's going to be the guy that has to lead this team. So I think James Harden can have a high value. And if the Clippers are smart and they realize Kawhi Leonard is not going to be fully healthy, this team's kind of in a limbo spot to where like they could cash in on maybe trading James Harden for a little bit of assets to try to get him moved and to try to really pick a direction of where they want to go, because they're in a weird limbo spot right now to where they're good. I like some of the pieces they have on their team, but it only matters if Kawhi Leonard is healthy for a lot of time this season. That's always been a big question mark with this team. This situation for James Harden being traded is more so if Kawhi Leonard can't stay healthy. If Kawhi Leonard can't stay healthy, I'm looking and opening the door and avenues to trying to move James Harden to try to bring in some capital that I can use for the future, because I feel like this is the last year where I'm looking at this team. If Kawhi Leonard can't stay healthy, this is kind of the turning point for this team. And if he can't stay healthy this year, I think it's time to start turning the wheels on James Harden possibly getting moved, which I think could be a definite avenue for this team at the upcoming deadline. But those are really my top 10 players I do think will be traded. I always like talking trades throughout the year. It's always going to be super situational based with some of these videos because we're not in the NBA season yet. So I got to kind of think of how things could play out for some of these players to get moved. But that is all I have for this episode. Let's talk about it. Thank you guys for tuning into the Barrel Talk podcast. Hope to see you tune in to future episodes.